Welcome to Fast Pace, the new growth, leadership and management podcast featuring Josh Phegan and Dean Mackie. We wanted to peel back the layers on what happens in the world of fast-paced real estate agencies, from new leadership models to the management challenges we all face each day. This is about a new era in the estate agency sector. Rapid changes to business models, service lines, remuneration and growth present the greatest opportunities that we've ever seen. Sit back, get inspired, grow your skills, and reimagine what's possible with Fast Pace. Every Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Josh Phegan Digital. Titles and talent. This is one of the great conversations. You know, Dean, titles are kind of an interesting thing, and I don't know about you, I'm not massive on having a title. I do understand the importance of the functional role around what it is that they do. But do titles actually matter? Is it a conversation between, is it ego or is it essential? And how do you actually make sure that you really are good at bringing in, outside talent into your organization, but you don't set them up for failure because of the title they get day one? It's an interesting thing. I might be the CEO or the founder, or I might be the speaker, trainer, coach, whatever you want to call me. Man, at the end of the day, I'm still picking up the coffee cups at the end of the training sessions if that's what actually needs to be done on the inside of the organization. I think it's a really interesting conversation around, titles. Do we make them too big and too grand? Are we in a position that ultimately we're just not getting clear about what their purpose actually is? Dean, what are your thoughts on some of this stuff? Because there's a lot to unpack in this conversation.
Yeah, look, I think it can also spark a lot of debate. I think there's people I've come across that job titles are really important to, and there are others that, to your point, have the same sort of view to you. And I understand the pros and cons too. I think there's a few learnings I've had over the years around this, because historically, I'm a 71 vintage, so I've worked in hierarchical businesses. I've worked in all different types of businesses, some with no hierarchy, and I've had the experiences of that. And I do think, again, depending upon the style of business they're in, there's pros and cons, right? Mm-hmm. But what I have learned is that sometimes when you've got labels and hierarchy, you do get ego. Mm-hmm. You definitely can get that, and that can cause power struggles and issues in a business. And I think what I've focused on is saying, how do I remove that? Because I think anything that's going to get in the way of enablement is important to remove. Yeah. But I also get that there's practical value around having clarity about job function, mm-hmm. and also giving people aspirational career progression, because that can drive people to want to improve and grow and do additional training and so forth. So I think getting clear on roles and responsibilities is the critical factor, because that helps facilitate better communication. It helps facilitate accountability, and like I mentioned, it's about career growth and all those sorts of things. So for me, I think getting away from any power struggles, I think is important. And we've actually moved in our business to a cross-functional team. Mm-hmm. And so that was like understanding, what are the functions? So it's revenue and so on and so on and so on. So the different parts of the business have different functions. Mm. And it basically also means sometimes, like when you give someone a job, let's say, I've typically seen like the general manager role, right? Often in a real estate office, you see a lot of those. Mm. And I'm not trying to offend anyone who's a GM, but sometimes I find the GM role tries to put its arms around all stuff in the business. Yeah. And all things in the business end up starting and finishing with that person. And that can be a major inhibitor to the business.
And what's the difference between the CEO and the GM?
Well, look, it depends on your business too, right? Like a CEO, and again, I'm fortunate to be working in a business with a bit more scale. So the role of the CEO in my business will be different to a role of a CEO in a smaller business, right? So I think that's another whole
conversation, right?
Yeah, conversation.
It's an important one though, because like when you walk inside of a business and you go, oh, that person's the CEO and that one person's the GM and that person's the head of ops, it's like, well, who does what around here? Yeah. And if people are confused, that's a problem.
Yeah, and that can happen. So I think what therefore getting really clear about what people's function is really helps, and it also to encourage how people are clear on function. If a project is for delivery in a business for implementation or whatever, it's a matter of making sure you got the right people at the table. So learning who does what and who does what part of the process is really important, and it can actually make things a lot faster. Mm-hmm. But what we try and do is say, okay, for any project, we want 3 or 4 people max who are going to deliver that, but I'm going to deliver the bit that relates to my swim lane. It doesn't mean I have to deliver the whole project, but the bit that relates to me, I need to know what that is and exactly when that timing comes in and allow for that. So I think whatever you do, being clear about what the function is, the role, the responsibility, responsibility, and making sure people understand who are the stakeholders who do what part will actually help. Because, I'm about how do we increase collaboration, how do we increase teamwork. So I've found that is what creates success. I think anytime you've got a role or a function where everything starts and finishes with one person, things can get blocked, and people can get frustrated, and you get a bit of politics and power struggle and those things. That's what you want to try and do. So I think
that's a big one about the disempowerment piece. Like, when you see in a team and there's a sales agent, and then sometimes they've got they're establishing agent coming to join them, and they put the title junior agent, and then they're called senior agent. And it's like, I'm just going to deal with the junior agent then because I don't know how to negotiate.
That's typical hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
So and then you got the conversation around associate agent or co-agent.
Or my favourite, associate director. They just associate with the directors. And I think that the whole conversation is that, like, what's the purpose of what you're going to do? Now, Dean, this leads us into the next part. When you got to bring in top tier talent, right? Let's say, for example, you went out there and you had to recruit a new CEO for the group. The greatest fear is that if I bring someone in new with the title CEO overnight, they've got a completely different set of, ideas and thoughts and whatever about how that organisation is going to run. And then there's a lot of power struggle and stuff that goes on. That's a really dangerous thing I've seen happen in a lot of businesses. Sure. And I would say to you, okay, Josh Phegan quits being a real estate trainer and is going to apply for the role to become a CEO of Di Jones. Let's say that you guys had made the decision to do that. The interesting thing is I actually wouldn't go in on the title of CEO day one. I'd actually say to you, Dean, I'd much prefer to be like a bit more operations or special projects or something. Let me build the relationships inside the organisation. Let me really understand how this business absolutely works. And then, mate, if I'm then in a position that in 8, 9, 10 months down the track that you and the board say, hey, you're doing a great job, we really love what you do, and then you want to elevate title, I'm going to let you do that. But the relationship's more important to me, and understanding the political environment that I'm about to go into, depoliticise the organisation. That's important for the long-term success of me in the role, as opposed to just day one. That's the title.
Sure. But look, you want to honestly, an effective CEO is not someone who's necessarily the doer, right? Like, I think you got to realize that a role of a CEO is to make sure that the business is moving in the right direction, right? Culture's on point, and all that stuff. But I think you got to be really careful. CEO shouldn't be really in a heavily operational role. That's not the function of a CEO. If you want an operation, put a head of operations in or something, COO or something. But I think I get what you just said. I think before you employ them, whether it be a CEO or a head of sales or whatever, it's the same conversation. You've got to have functional clarity, right? You've got to understand, what am I doing this for? What's the purpose of this role? And what do I want it to achieve? So if you take, for example, Josh, we've got, as I said, a cross-functional team, and that's all about how do we increase collaboration and speed and get people who are focused on their strengths, not necessarily trying to get them to be the unicorn that does all. Even regional sales managers, I think that they get it. It's really hard to recruit for because you're wanting somebody who can do all this stuff, but they might be only really good at part of that. So how do you get people really focused on the swim lane that they're really good at? I think that's really important, and make sure they understand what role they play as part of a shared goal. So in our business, and I think for most real estate firms, we're definitely going through, or all going through, this learning process on digital transformation. And so we've recently recruited and focused on saying, well, if we're going to go into, we needed a new head of sales. Well, let's not think about it in a traditional sense. Let's look for someone who's got the skill set who can also help us with the digital transformation pieces. Who can also help us. So we've called it head of sales innovation, right? And so we looked at what our strategic goals were. And went, well, okay, now we know what our strategic goals are. We need that skill set. So therefore, we've developed a job title and then tried to find the right person to fit that, which we have, thankfully. So understanding what your leadership needs are is really the most important part of this conversation. It doesn't matter what the title is as such, as long as people understand their function. Titles are less relevant, I think, increasingly over time. It's sort of like, what's my function? Because you can actually hide behind a job title and be ineffective in your role. But I think what I've learned is that if you want to enable people, you need to say, well, look, let's not worry about the title. Let's worry about where you can actually make meaningful improvement in that function. And let's let the title go a little bit. And as you get people to do that and they let go of that, I've seen people sort of feel liberated and more enabled because you can actually limit people based upon the title itself, right? So,
which makes me think about the old Richard Flint thing. You're either building towards the clarity or you're adding to the confusion.
Spot on, mate. Spot on.
So I walk into a group and I say, hey, quick question. Who are you and what do you do here? And how someone talks about what they do tells me how they feel about what they do.
Spot on, and how someone. So you might start and go, okay, cool. You've now understood, identified what you need, right? You find the right person, so you got to go through the talent acquisition process, right? And then how when you get them in the business, Now that's when the rubber hits the road, right? Like how do you onboard them?
Yeah.
And I've got to tell you, we've made some onboarding mistakes if we don't help people get the onboarding right.
Yeah.
Their attitude when they come in around their onboarding. So this particular role, the person who's come into that role, I was saying to you before, the first 4 weeks in, they're asking all the right questions, right? They're collecting all the facts. They're putting down a strategy. So they're really listening, right? So they're not coming in and going, hey, guess what? Yeah, I actually know a lot about this already.
Yeah.
And I'm going to now give you my preordained thoughts on what we should do because I've got ego and I want to attach my ego to proving that I'm good enough.
Yeah.
No. It's all about humility and learning and understanding, building the relationships, right? Before they actually decide they want to do anything. So that onboarding success is really, really important to getting, and in effect, after the first 90 days, we'll sit with that person and we'll probably redefine the role based upon their findings and their recommendations of what they want to do. So I think if you're going to employ someone, you've got to also have flexibility and the willingness to learn and grow because they're going to see things that you haven't seen, right?
And we often say the best consultant is the person who's in the business day one. And how does that work?
Well, there's know-it-all, right?
Yeah. Where's the recruitment system?
One of your big things is learn it all, right? So this is a great opportunity for the organisation. So this person's learning, but it's a great opportunity for us all to learn and to pivot and get better at what we do. So I think that's why I think there's a lot of debate around this jobs titles versus talent and whatever. And I think the more we move away from attaching meaning and ego to something and putting limitations on it and creating opportunity for growth, the better we'll be.
Yeah, sometimes you walk into some really small firms and there's like 3 people and they're like,
sure.
Who are you? I'm the CEO. Who are you? I'm the general manager. And who are you? I'm the director of first impressions. And I'm like, who's the salesperson here? It's like, and so just be careful about titles and understand the organizational size that you've got.
Well, let me touch on that, Josh, because you're right. I mean, we've got people we've got 40 plus shareholders in Dow Jones, right? So they're shareholders and also partners. But they understand their role, right? Their role is not to necessarily come in and be the CEO or be the head of sales or whatever. They understand we've got shareholders from sales, from investment management, all parts of the business. But they're a shareholder in the organisation who's contributing to growth and improvement, but they're focusing really much on their swim lane, right? They're not trying to get involved with the hiring and firing and the decision-making, whatever. They go, I know I make maximum impact in my swim lane, right? So getting clear on function, I think, is more important than worrying about the title.